Very, very pleased to welcome Bob Gendler here from St. Andrew's Episcopal School. In fact, if I can just share, Bob told me offline that it was just last year that he was first diving into the Jamf API. So the title is true. API Noob to Ninja is our goal today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Bob.
All right. Hello, everybody. As Adam said, I'm Bob Gendler. I'm the 1-1 coordinator at St. Andrew's Episcopal School right outside of Washington, D.C. in Potomac, Maryland. I'm also the Apple platform engineer. So like a lot of you, I wear a lot of different hats. I pretty much manage everything Apple related at the school. But that's given me the ability and the leverage to learn everything I want to learn about the Jamf API and Jamf in general. So you all know why you're here. It's API Noob to Ninja session. And the agenda for today. I want to teach you what is an API, what is the Jamf API, learn how to use the Jamf API, see examples on how I use the Jamf API, and finally, with that knowledge, we'll take over the world. But first, story time. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, the Guthrie JNUC 2016, I was in your seat. I knew nothing about the Jamf API. I had an idea of something I wanted to build. I kind of did know a little bit, like there was this API thing, and that allowed you to build your own custom things and do stuff that you couldn't do by default. So I attended every session I could to soak in some information, a little bit from here and a little bit from there. But I kind of wanted to do everything. I wanted to do API stuff. I wanted to do webhooks. I went to things on Swift. It was completely overwhelming, and I confused myself. It was kind of like drinking from a fire hose of information. It was just too much, overwhelming and confusing. But one person, after a session, I went up and asked him if he had any help on getting started using the API and programming and all that type of stuff. And it was Joel from TrueSource. And like it says here, he told me, take a script you already have and just figure out how to do it using the API. And that really actually hit home with me because I have a lot of scripts that I've done in managing the one-to-one program at St. Andrews. And so I just needed to figure out how to do it a different way, basically. I even took this kind of one step further and started making little API scripts to do simple tasks that I could do in the JSS in seconds, but I just wanted to learn how to use the API. I remember I spent an entire afternoon very early on figuring out how to do an API call, get the result in JSON, to print a list of printers and display it really nicely and pretty. You know, that takes 4 seconds in the JSS, but learning this allowed me to use those skills and that knowledge down the road again. So here's kind of a script, and what it does is not super important, or the scripting, but you'll see here it's a short, pretty much a 4-line script, and it gets the current user, gets information from Active Directory, and then puts it up into the JSS. So I had to redo it using the API. As you see here, it becomes a lot longer. So the JSS, doing things with the API, is not always the better or easier or shorter way. It's just another way. It's another tool to have in your toolkit to managing the JSS and scripts. So what the heck is an API? Some of you might not even know what API stands for, which stands for Application Program Interface, which actually kind of means what? In my definition, sort of, it's an interface that allows you to easily program and build programs or scripts to interact with the application. The application being your Jamf Pro server, your JSS. Imagine if you want to make some sort of massive batch, big change to every computer in your inventory, every mobile device maybe. Maybe you want to update the phone number that's listed in there to your main company's phone number, or something like that, whatever. There's no way to do this by default with the JSS's interface. So without the API, you'd have to go in, monkey with the SQL database on the back end, understand how the database is laid out, know the SQL to do that, and then pray that you didn't fry your SQL database. And if it was cloud hosted, I'm not even sure you'd even have access to be able to do something like that. So that's kind of like a big generic picture of something that you could do with the Jamf API. It basically gives you a simple way to interface with a complex system. Because I'm sure not even a single person at Jamf knows the layout of the big relational database that is the Jamf server. So the Jamf API. The Jamf API is a RESTful API, which stands for Representational State Transfer. Essentially, it means that the necessary state to handle the request is contained within the body itself, whether it's part of the URL, query string parameters, body, or headers. So first you have a request. It has a URL. So it would be like to your Jamf Pro server and then to an endpoint. You have the HTTP method. Do you want to get data? Do you want to put data? What is the method that's going to happen? You have the headers. You have to tell it. Do you want to get XML? Do you want to get JSON? You might have to pass on some authentication, right? And then finally, if you're putting data up into it, you need to include that data. The response from the JSS server is going to give you a status code. Some of them that you might know already would be like a 404, file not found. 200, it's succeeded. And you can use Google and figure out all of these status codes. It's really not necessary for right now. So the response also includes the header. Is it giving you back JSON? Is it giving you back XML? Kind of some of that information. And then the body, the result, basically, the most important piece of the response. And as you see here, it doesn't keep a live connection or a session across multiple requests. You have to include all of that information every time, the header, the body, everything with every request. It goes client, makes the request, it goes to the server, and the server responds, right? Nothing across multiple sessions. Every time it needs to include every piece. So what can you do with the Jamf API? What functions are there? What HTTP methods can you do? And if you remember nothing, just remember CRUD. Create, read, update, delete. So you're creating with a HTTP method of post. You're reading with get. You're updating with put. And you're deleting with delete. Pretty straightforward. So there's two formats that the Jamf API uses, and maybe Jamf 10 changes all of this, so this is all for Jamf 9. But there's two formats that it uses right off the bat, XML and JSON. Both are similar to each other, but both are also very different from each other. And the Jamf API can only, and as you see, I stressed only accept XML, but can return either. So, don't spend an afternoon trying to send JSON up to it, because I may have done that and learn from my mistake. Both JSON and XML are similar to each other because they're both human readable. They're both kind of self-describing. Both JSON and XML are hierarchical. Both JSON and XML can be parsed and used by lots of different languages, right? JSON is not like XML, though, because it doesn't use end tags. It's also shorter, it's generally quicker to read and write, and it can use arrays. XML has to be parsed using an XML parser. Honestly, you're probably going to hate XML, but you're also going to hate JSON. So there's nothing perfect. Just swallow the poison and sort of enjoy it. I personally tend to use JSON when I'm doing scripts with Python where I have to work with the data. XML, like I said, is the only way to input stuff up into the API, into your JSS. So it tends to be JSON more when I'm working with it, because it's just a little bit easier to work with. So here's an example of XML. There's an XML header. There's starts and finishes to each piece. It kind of just exactly looks like a plist, because that's what plists are. And here's some JSON. As you see, there's no start tags and end tags, but there is a whole lot of curly brackets and quotes and commas and all sorts of things that can make it a little bit confusing to read as well. Now, if you're going to use JSON, find yourself a JSON viewer. You know, maybe this site is the best one out there. I don't know. This is one I use, though, because that JSON that you saw really was spit out in one line. There's no line breaks in it, and something like a JSON viewer is going to beautify that code for you. It added all the tabs, and some of them can even make it collapsible threads and stuff like that. So it's really useful if you're using JSON to find yourself a viewer that you like. Maybe a downloadable app, maybe whatever, but that's one that I use. So now how do you use the Jamf API? Because that's why we're all here. We want to know how to use it. So if you're on your computer and you have access to your Jamf Pro server, just go to your Jamf Pro server /API. And all of the documentation is right there. You've all had it at your fingertips to use, and maybe some of you didn't even realize it was right there. So really, I could almost be done because you have all the knowledge then to use it. But an important thing to notice, if you are poking around in it right now, or later on, is where it says subset. Instead of getting everything under the sun from a request for, say, a computer or whatever EndNote or device it might be, maybe you just want something, a section like general information. And so you could do the endpoint to the computer /subset /general. And it's just going to give you that general information. And so you're really just getting the information that you're looking for instead of some big ginormous dump of all of the information, which makes the response a little bit quicker to get and a little bit smaller amount of data. So there's a couple of tools to use with the API. So the API documentation. Postman is a tool that I can't recommend enough when using web-based APIs like this. CrashPlan is another web-based thing that has an API, and Postman and all of this works just the same with that. curl, so that you can do things via the command line. And sort of along the lines of curl, whatever your favorite language is. If none, then I'd probably start with bash, because it's the easiest to learn right off the start. But I didn't want to just say scripting language, because people are building Swift applications using the Jamf API. So, and that's not a scripting language, that's a full-blown programming language. So basically anything that can make an HTTP request, you can use to interact with the Jamf API. So right here, I want to give you kind of a little bit of a demo of using the Jamf documentation. It should be your #1 stop shop, I guess, for all of the endpoints and information on the Jamf API, right? It will also give you results. You can do API calls right within it, so you can see what the result should be. And this is the only place that you're going to find, oh, it is changing. This is the only place that you're going to find all of the endpoints to interact with. And so I'm just going to show you kind of how to use with advanced computer searches. You'd click it, and you'll see here's all the methods that you have available: getting, posting, putting, deleting, right? And I'm going to get one real quick, an advanced computer search called Loaners. Get it? And there it is. if you were doing it right now on your own, something like that, it might ask for authentication because some of these require authentication, some don't, but I had already logged into it, so I didn't need it. It gives you right here the request URL, and then right under that is the XML response. So all of that beautiful XML is right there, what you should be getting when you write your scripts. Under that's the JSON response, so all of that beautiful JSON. And right under that's the response code and all of the response headers that you get. The second thing that you should have kind of in your toolkit is Postman. So go get Postman maybe right now if you want. It's a really cool program for doing all of this. And I know I've only touched the surface of what it can do. In fact, over the summer, somebody had mentioned a feature of it that I'll show you that made me fall in love with it even more. So here's a small demo of Postman. And like I said, it's a really powerful program for doing all this type of stuff. It's useful, if you want to do stuff using the CrashPlan API. So it has all of these HTTP methods available. But for the Jamf API, we only care about getting and putting those 4 that I had listed before. So I'm going to paste the URL in for the advanced computer search. And we're going to pass through some authentication. And now that authentication I've already deleted, so don't try to figure out what the password was. We're going to give it some headers because we want to tell it, we want you to return to me XML. So we're telling it we want to accept XML. There we go. Then we'll hit send. And there's the response that we got. Just like using kind of the documentation, super easy, super useful when doing API calls. Like I said, it's a very powerful tool that can do all of these different things. It also will tell you a lot of the information, like right here, tells you the status code and what it means. So now, let me show you the cool feature. So you did your API call, right? And now how do I take this and put it in a script or a program? Well, there's a feature in Postman that'll help you do that. So right over here is a link that says code. And when you click it, it actually shows you the code, either the command for curl that it would require, or the code in all sorts of different languages, as you can see here, some Python. So it's building all of that code for you, and you really just pop in some variables, and your scripts are almost written for you. So Postman, like I said, is a super cool, super powerful program that some people didn't even know that use it, that has this feature right here. So many different languages that it can do, this for, and I'm sure it's even getting more as it gets updates. So then curl. Curl is the next step because first one was the documentation, then Postman, and so the third thing is curl. And curl is actually a really powerful tool, not just for Jamf API tasks, but for all API scripting. Doesn't matter which web-based API it is, curl is going to be maybe your tool for that. For those that aren't familiar with curl, you can also use it to download files off of a web server. You can also use it to check the status of a web server. And you can use it to get the external IP address pretty quickly. So all these things are kind of useful for other scripts and other uses of curl. Curl in itself is rarely ever used by itself and almost always a part of a script or in an application. So curl for the Jamf API use. And so I broke all of this up into multiple lines, but this should be one line. So if you open up the terminal on your computer, if you feel like following along, so if you open up the terminal and type curl space, then -x get, because we need to tell it what we're going to do, space, then the address to the resource, and for this example, I'll just get a dump of the info from all of your computers. And then -u, your username. And so you put in your username. And you could do username, :password for a script. But for simplicity's sake, right now, we're just going to do -u, your username. Hit return. Oops, went too far. Hit return. And it will give you a dump of all of the info of all of your computers. So if you did it right now along with that, congrats, you've done your first API call. There we go. So now here, let me show you some examples of using the Jamf API with Bash and getting XML that I've used it. So right here is that script that I kind of had mentioned earlier. The top portion, it gets information about the user, the current user logged in, gets it from Active Directory. But then the important part is right here, the API portion. So when doing a script, you have to put the password, you have to put the username, the endpoint, and then you need, since this was going to be ran on that computer, on a client computer, I needed a way to uniquely identify a computer. The computer name might not be the best method because sometimes it might be a little off, or maybe there was a mistype on it or something, right? But the best way that I thought of was the max serial number. So we're getting the serial number, then we're building the XML as you see there, and finally the curl statement to make it happen. You see there's -h, and we're telling the Jamf Pro server, we're giving you XML. Then -d for the data, -x at the bottom for the method. We're putting data up into you. And then finally, I'm piping all output to dev null because I don't care about seeing it, but obviously in testing it, you wouldn't want to do something like that. So a second example that I have here is it goes and it gets a nice printed list of the departments. So I have, when the first time a faculty or staff member logs in, they get a pop-up that's pulled up by Cocoa Dialog with a pull-down of what department are you in. And it's pulling that list of departments live using this API script. And so it's very much similar to the last example. You have a username, you have a password, you have the URL to the endpoint. But then we're saying we want to accept XML. And under that, you'll see XML lint. Like I said earlier, you need an XML parser to kind of read XML. So that's the one thing that separates XML and JSON, is that. So with XML lint, if you're going to use XML in your API scripts, learn XML lint. There's a man page for it. Also, a lot of resources out there on the internet talk about it. So then we echo the result. So now I just want to show you kind of a quick example that I did using Python. And so this was a script. I wanted to create a mail merge, basically, based off of an advanced computer search. We had students that they were leaving the school and they needed to return their laptops to me. And this was a great way to kind of make sure that they get notified. I also had a pop-up coming up on their screen, but I cover all bases, basically. And so the Jamf, the JSS interface, actually under Actions, allows you to email a group or an advanced computer search, but it won't let you kind of make it more like a mail merge. I wanted to include their name in the email, the name of the computer they have, stuff like that. So I created a mail merge, basically, using Python. And so Python's a lot more messy, kind of a lot more you have to do, but it's still pretty much the same thing. You're building a request, and you'll see there the headers. We're telling it, I want to accept JSON. You'll see there the header portion that says the authorization. We're passing a username and password. Then it opens that, and we're passing it on to the JSON reader. And the cool thing here was then we get the JSON, and like I said, JSON are arrays. And so it was just an array variable, and so I could just loop through and have it get the pieces of information that I needed. And using the mail command built into the system, it would just email out then 50 emails or however many it was, all customized, all immediately done like that. 50 emails in 10 seconds is nice. And so why did I do an advanced computer search? Because the JSON it got was then a lot shorter. The JSON received looked kind of like this. There's a lot less grepping and cleaning up the data, a lot quicker of a response from the JSS. So advanced computer searches are really the way to go when you need to email even a smart group. Just make an advanced computer search off of a smart group. Because it's not pulling unneeded information, which if it's a really large pool, that can really add up in time. So this was a way to speed it up a lot. So here's an example of how I used the API with PHP, in fact. And so this last JNUC, when I was here, I had this idea to build this. We kept track of our loaners with a pen and paper. That's why it kind of looks like a piece of paper. We wanted to keep that. But we would keep track of who had what loaners just on a notepad, basically. It worked well because there's only 2 or 3 people that kept track of those things. But there was no way then, obviously, to update information in the JSS automatically. So I built this using all sorts of API calls, and it's all dynamically created off of a smart group. Is that playing? Hold on. Yep. Is it? It should be going through. Oh, there it goes. Starts moving. As you see, it's all dynamically created. And you just would then type in the user that it's checked out to, set a date that the laptop has been checked out, submit it, and now that laptop is checked out to me. And if we click on the thing, it takes you to that page within the JSS. And you'll see right there, it's now assigned to me. I created some extension attributes for availability and date in and out. So this gave me a real big flexibility to now do almost anything using the Jamf API and the JSS. If I want to check it back in, select the date that it's returned, hit submit. And now it's checked back out, or checked back in. We hit refresh on the thing, on the page, and you'll see I'm no longer the user, and availability has changed, and the date returned has changed. So this is all based off of a smart group with policies that run when people are, logging into a loaner and all sorts of stuff with that. And then to make the API call faster, I created a advanced computer search and limited the display to only the fields that I wanted, right? That actually sped up that page a whole lot. Maybe it loads twice as fast, in fact. So this was the data that I built that off of, basically. So that's that. And so here's all of the PHP. I'm not going to go through it at all because we could really spend a whole lot of time and it's kind of boring. But know that it's there and it's long. And anyways, here are some other small projects that I did using the Jamf API, and these might spark an idea in your head, right? We expanded our iPad one-to-one program. Previously, it was just pre-K to 2nd grade, and now we added 3rd and 4th grade. And I wanted to start assigning the iPads to the specific students and setting the class that they're in, their department. So what I did was I created a Google form that the teachers would then put the inventory tag and which student has it. It creates a Google Sheet. I exported that as a CSV and just had a script run through that and upload all the usernames and departments and all that type of information into the Jamf Pro server. All of them were updated in 3 seconds after I wrote that. Another thing, like I was saying, since we expanded our iPad one-to-one, I wanted to change all of the mobile self-service apps to to not display if they're already installed. And the default is to display if they are installed. So I could go through 100 plus apps and change them, take all day, or I could figure out how to do it using the API. And it maybe took half as the amount of time, maybe more, I don't know, but it's more learning how to do it. A third big task that I did using the API is that there's no way to export extension attributes or scripts from the JSS. I've wrote a lot of pretty cool scripts, I feel, and so I wanted to be able to export those so I have them and so that I could upload them to a GitHub. So I wrote an API script to do that and write each one to a file. Another thing that I've done is I need to be able to move a computer to a static group, like it says there, via self-service policy. Once again, the Jamf API was the way to do that. So there are problems with the Jamf API, however. Security is kind of one of them. So it's suggested that you make an API user instead of just using your login, your admin account. But that API user really has to have a lot of access to be able to do things. So it basically is almost like an admin in a sense. Which leads to the next part, is that you have a very powerful password in plain text, be it in scripts that might be on your computer. But let's say, for example, with the self-service policy, the script then gets written to the client's computer with a very powerful password in plain text. So if the security is very tight where you work, some of these things may not work for you. The Jamf API is not always clear, to be honest. Some of the endpoints, you read it a few times and it just doesn't make sense, or even the way somebody might explain it. It just is not always that clear. And finally, it doesn't always work. I'd say maybe 96, 98% of the time it does. I know the one time recently that I found that it didn't work for me was I needed to change the name of every Apple TV we had. And I could go through, manually do that type of thing. But I wrote a script that then, took a CSV file and uploaded based off of the serial numbers and this, that, and tried to change all the names. And it just wouldn't work. After making sure I wasn't uploading JSON to it, and spending a whole afternoon frustrated, I did some more researching and found that just doesn't work. But there's a tool called Mutt that did the trick for me great. So there are workarounds for some of the problems that you might run into. There we go. So there are a couple of resources, obviously, where to go to learn about the Jamf API. Number one spot for everything Jamf related, obviously, is Jamf Nation board. If anybody in here doesn't go there, I don't know what you're really doing here then. The second spot that I learned a lot from was the unofficial reference for the Jamf Pro API. A third step was the JSS REST API for everyone. And finally, the Mac admin Slack channel. So if you're not on Slack, join it. Find yourself the Mac admin's channel and start asking questions. There's a channel within it for specifically just this, the JSS API. So there's one last resource, though, that I want to share with you that I use a lot when it comes to the Jamf API and scripting, in fact, is shellcheck.net. This is going to save you so much time. So if you've written this script, and it basically doesn't matter what language, you can paste it into here, and it's going to tell you if it passes syntax. It's not going to really run the script. Actually, it may run depending on what the script does, but it's going to tell you if it passes the syntax, because maybe you've forgotten a quotation mark or a comma or some small little thing that's really easy to overlook and that you're going to spend 6 hours ramming your head against a wall because the script doesn't work. This is going to tell you exactly what line and what's missing, more or less. So shellcheck.net, if you're writing scripts, Jamf API or not, use that. So all the scripts that you saw from me are available on my GitHub. I'm going to try to make sure that I have the most current version of most of these scripts available on there. But be kind, because I'll admit I'm kind of like an amateur hour of scripting. And I want to leave everybody with just this. Just like Joel had kind of passed on an idea to me. This idea that everyone can learn, right? It's easy to learn. Everyone can do it. It might take some of you longer to learn, but everyone starts somewhere different. And maybe we can't all be experts, but we don't all need to be experts to use the product and to use the Jamf API. But everyone can learn. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate it. We do have a few minutes for questions. We have a couple microphones up front, so feel free to come up if you have any.
Thanks for talking.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Do you have a place where we can get some of those link recommendations all over in your deck?
I don't, but maybe if there's a thread on the Jamf Nation board, I'll try to share them all in there. If
Perfect.
not, I'll create one tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey there.
Hey.
So you said that the Jamf API doesn't always work, and I feel like that you run into that where there's a lot of things you're trying to do, and maybe like your connection gets throttled some way, halfway through your operation, and then like this doesn't finish or something. What advice or tips would you have for people who are like trying to do something in the API at scale, like maybe different ways you can write your stuff?
So I haven't had too many problems where like the scale of things have caused problems because we only have 1,000 devices. And so I haven't actually had to update like 1,000 items. Try to maybe break it into multiple groups, like through advanced computer searches or through smart groups. That might help. I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. Sorry.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for your presentation. This is more of a question probably for the group, but also for yourself. I'm very similar to yourself, just learning API, more of a bash guy. When we're in mobile devices and we want to change the name, you can go to mobile device, find your device, edit it, and there's that little checkbox, enforce mobile device name. I can't find an API call for that. I thought I saw a posting on JNUC or Jamf Nation for that, but I was wondering if anyone in this room knew that.
Yeah, I haven't had to fix or change that, so I don't know either. But yeah, somebody out here who is well versed in it may know, actually. He's over there if you can tell him.
Hi. I noticed that one of the particular pain points, and even for us, was the plain text passwords. And this isn't really a question. I just wanted to know if I could share something with the room while we're all here on something I stumbled across a week or two ago to help solve that. Is on the Jamf IT Git repo, they actually have a project where they stored the passwords as a salted OpenSSL secret, and then they use the script parameters to store one half of that in the JSS and then the other in the script, so you could call it, and when it combined, it would do the password. So you wouldn't have to store it, just the password?
Yeah, and I think I did actually, I think I saw maybe a post or something about that. Also, not quite that it's much more secure, but if you use Postman to build the code, it kind of makes a hash of it. I mean, you could still copy and paste that hash and do damage with that, but yeah, it's probably not much different than that.
Right, I just wanted to share that in case
Yeah, no,
that
thank
could be
you.
helpful.
Yeah.
Actually, just to piggyback off what he said, another option is as long as you don't need to run a script like this on a schedule type basis where you have to save the password, you could just grab the password from the command line as you run the script. So that way you're not saving the password in the script itself.
Oh, never thought of it. Yeah.
And there's one more way.
Oh.
As long as you don't have multi-instances, you can use a .netrc file, I think it's called, for curl, and curl will read the username and password from there.
Okay.
So you don't need to put it in the script then.
Oh, okay.
But if you have multi-instances like me, it's no
Yeah,
use.
then you're then you're up a creek.
Question about the kind of loaner example with
Yeah.
the reserving loaners. For the extension attributes that you were creating, were you basically just creating like a template extension attribute? Obviously, every EA has an ID, so you were just then feeding whatever data you wanted into that EA, and so that way there's actually no script or anything behind
Correct.
it.
Correct. Yeah. And you can set, I think, a date as a type of extension attribute, so that was perfect for that.
Okay.
And I think the other one was a dropdown.
Okay.
So yeah, it worked out even easier than setting it just as being text.
Thank you.
We'll go over here.
Yep, just wondering if you or if anyone in here has experimented with FileMaker 16 and its RESTful API to connect with JSS, and that way everything in your FileMaker database can just be uploaded and updated in JSS.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we use FileMaker at our school, so I will have to play with that.
Keep me informed then,
Yeah.
please.
I don't know whether I'll get too successful with it, but
So not everything in the JSS has an endpoint in the API.
okay.
Some of those checkboxes, and there's certain things that you just can't do. But give Jamf feedback. They're adding things in all the time, and if there's enough need from the community to do something, they're more than willing to try to make something happen. So just a point.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for coming. Yeah.